Chag Sameach. Good afternoon, everybody. Modim Simcha. Thank you for coming. We're in the middle of the holiday of Sukkot, Chol HaMoed Sukkot. And this beautiful inscription that we have on the top of our bima, Ma Tovu Halecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. We have a really beautiful dwelling place. We really do. We're very fortunate to have such a beautiful synagogue and dwelling place for our community. And for thousands of years, Jews were not always able to have beautiful synagogues because of the conditions and living as a minority. But we always had that within us. And go back to Solomon's temple and the beauty of a sacred space, holy space, what it can do to lift up our prayers, to lift up our minds, to make everything, our gathering, more meaningful, our eating in this room as we do several times a week, more meaningful. And it took a lot of energy, and it took a lot of creativity, and it took a lot of resources to make such a beautiful building and to keep it up to date and keep it being something that inspires us and that elevates us in all the things we do in this building. So today we'll be hearing about some of that, how this space came to be as it is, our building, our bima, through all of those, as we continue to celebrate our 75 years. And gratitude has been expressed throughout this year to the heads of our 75th committee, Michael Zmora and Len Grossman, to everyone else who's been participating. I know that Allison Newman and Andy Kushner have been working hard on the documentary that'll be shown on November 15th. Hope everybody can make it for that one. And I want to thank Mike Bass and others who are part of that committee for their hard work. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Now, Michael Zmora is going to be speaking, giving a lecture about the art and architecture of our beautiful building. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Just as a sort of run of show, I'm going to give this talk with a lot of fun pictures. There's hot food that's going to be coming out intermittently between now and the next 10 minutes. There's West High. So if anyone wants, this is a very Hamish event, please go get food as you go. I will not be offended. And then after that's all done, we're going to take a short break, and then me and Linda Bisberg, who I will introduce later, are going to speak about the Kadima campaign of the 1990s. So I titled my speech, or my talk here, A New Heart and a New Spirit, the Construction of West Suburban Temple Har Zion in the years 1949 to 1954. A New Heart and a New Spirit, we will see, this is how Rabbi Moshe Babin referred to the construction of the synagogue, or the concept of the synagogue when it was first being introduced. He beseeched the community, this is a building with a new heart and a new spirit. So, before we talk about this building that we're in, I do have to talk briefly about the congregation's building before 1950, 1951. The congregation actually had its original building in Oak Park at 414 Lake Street. This is what that building looked like. Our community, which was then known as the West Suburban Jewish Community Center, or sometimes just called the Center, had purchased this structure in August of 1937 and moved in just after the high holidays. This was a former dance studio. Here you can see how the local Oak Park newspapers covered the Jews' first formal community congregation. The Jewish people buy Lake Street site for community center, and that's how big it looked on the front page of the Oak Parker, so you get a sense of the moment for us. All right, Charles, you can advance it. This is what the interior of that space looked like. It was all-purpose space. Services obviously were held here, and so you see what was kind of the bima in the dance studio, probably what was the stage. But it was also used for, parties. They had their own temple dances. This is a temple dance from, I think, 1949, because there is an Israeli flag in this one. They had men's club meetings. sisterhood meetings, Hadassah meetings, Jewish youth group meetings. And so you can see there's the bowling trophy from the men's club. And you can advance it, Charles. And this is what the space looked like from the other perspective. The Bima was on the stage, but obviously it's a small room. After what I described in an event in March, we'll call it a very complicated, discriminatory history with Oak Park in an attempt to build a larger community congregation in Oak Park. The community gave up on that plan and set its sights on undeveloped land in River Forest in late 1946. So in December of 1946, David Gottlieb, of the Gottlieb family, Gottlieb Foundation actually, made a $25,000 donation towards the new building. And this actually covered the majority of what was the $28,000 purchase for the land on which we're standing right now. Just another fact, this is what, I pulled this document from the Recorder of Deeds office in the Cook County building. This is what the registration of the sale of our building was, and this demonstrates that this was done through a straw man purchase. The owners of the land, this is one of them, Anna Behrens, sold the land to Albert Hoffman, who was a prominent member of our shoal, who then also bought the same parcel of land adjacent to the parcel we're in now, so the side where the parking lot is, from her sister, Jeanette Celestra, and then the next day, he sold the land to the shoal. So, and then recorded it after January 1st, 1947, so that there wouldn't be a 3-day period where they could back out of the deal. So just so you know how we got where we're standing here today. This is what that land looked like. It's empty. I believe we're looking north to Thomas. At the time, if you look on the right, Harlem Avenue was only a 2-lane road. It was expanded in 1950 to the 4-lane road we have today, so this is kind of a perspective on, I guess, a more rural river forest. All right. So this is actually the original architectural plan for the shoal. As you can see, that's facing north. This is unfortunately not the best copy. This copy appeared in the synagogue bulletin in the spring or summer of 1947. It's obviously very different. The terrace is on the front. The auditorium or sanctuary is facing kind of westerly direction. So even then, our show wasn't planning on facing Jerusalem, which is interesting. The library, youth recreation, and preschool concepts were all built in originally, but I think if you look at it, can somebody tell me what's missing from this picture? Bingo, no parking. So this is interesting. In October of 1947, River Forest passed an ordinance called Temples, Churches, Parking, and it required that for every 10 seats in a new temple or church, that there needs to be 1 parking space. So this design did not meet that standard, and so they kind of went back to the drawing board. I think that during 1947 and 48, they were also in a kind of a fundraising push, and so they didn't really have a sense exactly of what they were going to do, but they were working with these architects that they had hired. So, in December of 1948, the congregation, which was now called West Suburban Temple, they had renamed in the end of 1947, it got a new rabbi. This is Rabbi Moshe Babin. Babin was 32 years old. He came to the congregation from Philadelphia, from the shul called Adat Yeshurun, where he was the assistant rabbi. Although he was originally from Boston, and if people knew him, he had a very, very thick Boston accent. Babin was very dedicated, firmly dedicated, I would say, to this project of building a new synagogue, and he took a very active role in the project alongside Nathan Gottlieb, David Gottlieb's brother, and Al Newman, who were the co-chairs of the building committee. And so here, in the spring of 1949, the congregation had hired the architectural firm that we saw the previous designs for, Lobo, Schlossman, and Bennett. For those of you who are architectural buffs, Lobo, Schlossman, and Bennett, in terms of synagogues, their first big project was Temple Shalom in Lakeview. They later did the Loop Synagogue, but from the perspective of all the other things they built, it's an extremely interesting and long list. The Water Tower Place, They did the Old Orchard Mall. They did the entire village of Park Forest in 1949. Oak Brook Center, Water Tower Place I mentioned, 2 Prudential Plaza. They were a very important firm, but in 1949 we were, I think, only their second or third synagogue. They had done a synagogue, Temple Shalom, and they had just completed, over in the middle of working on, Temple Bethel in South Bend, Indiana, a Reform Shul. So we were the next project. At the same time, they were designing the entire village of Park Forest, which took them about 4 or 5 years. So they were very busy, but we got a lot of attention. There's a lot of back and forth correspondence. I will say we were very lucky, it's a very fun coincidence that in the basement of our shul, there was a file cabinet that was sitting next to the boiler that had every letter for about 3 or 4 years between Rabbi Babin and anybody he corresponded with, Nathan Gottlieb and Al Newman and everyone they corresponded with, and a slew of other papers. So we have a very granular view of what it was like to run the synagogue during these 3 or 4 years. And I was able to kind of find these kind of papers, letters like this. These are actually the building committee minutes. But back to this particular story. Back in this period of time, in April of 1949, Rabbi Babin is trying to figure out what it is they want. As you can see, he is considering such ideas as a fixed ark, as opposed to the movable ark we have now. They were, I think, probably proposed the idea of a movable ark even before this, but Rabbi Babin is asking for a fixed ark, and the idea then was, what do we do when we have high holidays? We will start moving walls. We'll start having these walls come in and out, and I think as people who've been to Oak Park Temple know, that's how they resolve this problem, and that's actually typically how most synagogues resolve the problem of having to expand the space. The other thing I thought that was interesting here is, it's hard to read, but there was a proposal to build a 3-room apartment in the basement for a caretaker, which I would love to have seen. Charles, it would change your residential experience a little bit. So, you can skip to the next one. But the other thing that was happening was Babin was reading and reviewing what other Jewish congregations were considering in new synagogue construction. It's noteworthy to say that in this window of time between 1945 and 1955, statistically they believe 1,000 synagogues were built in the United States, which is a tremendous number. Almost all of these were suburban synagogues as the Jewish communities that had been in large urban centers moved out to suburbia. We're in kind of the early stages of that 1,000 synagogue movement. Most of them come towards the later part of the first half of the 50s and into the second half of the 1950s. But at the same time, architects were speaking about their work and writing about it. And so in June of that year, Babin circulated a copy of an article he found in Commentary magazine, co-written by Percival Goodman with his brother Paul. Goodman was an architect himself and would actually end up himself building 50 synagogues between 1944 and 1978. This is a 5-page article, so it's pretty short. It had a lot of ideas about what architecture should be for synagogues and what the art in synagogues should be. But the big point it was making, and which is mentioned in the summary here of the article that I excerpted, was that in these post-war years, young Jewish artists should be employed by synagogues to freely imagine Jewish themes and work inside the new suburban synagogues being built, while the synagogues themselves should adhere to modern styles and not be beholden to these older synagogue architectural forms, Moorish architecture and the architecture of more Gothic structures that had predominated in the late 19th and early 20th century during the last stage of urban synagogue architecture. So these ideas, obviously, as we see, found expression in our building. In dramatic fashion, and after 6 months of delay, the River Forest Village Board finally approved the plans of the architects, and in December of 1949, they granted our congregation the building permit. This is the model that was presented and was built based on those plans, and this is a version of the model sitting on someone's coffee table, because this was actually a kind of event where the synagogue invited small groups to a kind of coffee clutch where you could go see the model, and make your pledge for the contribution to build the synagogue, which is a very smart move. But I love the curtains here from 1949, I think are pretty great. And then here is what I was referring to earlier. This is the appeal that Rabbi Babin wrote, and this ended up appearing in the synagogue bulletin. He called it A New Heart and a New Spirit. The appeal was really for funds, of course, but it went as follows. This new temple will serve you. This new temple is for your children. Dare you say that we will do less for our children than our fathers did for us? This is good. It's good work. After the foundation laying was delayed due to an extremely cold and snowy winter, this is one of the coldest and snowiest winters in Chicago history at the time, construction began in earnest in the early spring of 1950. Rabbi Babin, however, was proposing changes to the plan as construction started. For the first time in this letter, Rabbi Babin mentions the larger River Forest community, and he says with regard to the design for the main sanctuary, the ark and the pulpit, here's what he says. It must be a piece of beauty, for it will reflect the religion of Judaism in a Gentile community. Babin then also asks to extend the length of the room. So I think he wanted to add, I think it says here, he wanted to add 50 to 60 seats, which they end up doing. And the part I thought that was really interesting is on page 2. Again, the basement comes up. Now we're no longer trying to find a caretaker space. Now, he asks, is it possible to have a completely excavated basement? This can later be fixed up as a small gym, basketball court, etc. With maybe 1 or 2 shower stalls? Even bowling alleys will be able to be added later. The young people have already asked for, I would love to know, if right now we were sitting here during a service and we just hear the crack of bowling pins running underneath us. That would be truly wonderful. You can go to the next one. So here are the plans that were presented as revised by the firm after Babin's suggestions. And here I have to say, we didn't have these plans here. I actually had to go to the Art Institute, which has a library, and in the library they have the papers of Loeber, Schlossman, and Bennett. And if everyone's ever seen original architectural blueprints, they're roughly the size of this table in its entirety. So I had to stand on like 2 chairs and photograph from above. So the heights I went to get this good photo. But this, you can kind of see the different elements and how they're different from how we have it today. As you would have come in, the entrance is the same, of course. We have our entrance vestibule. The storage closet is roughly the same, but of course that's where we keep our talit. And on the right is the office. Now what's different, of course, is directly to the right of that was the rabbi's study, and directly to the right of that is the library. And we all know those buildings as preschool classrooms. The rabbi's study is Miss Claudine's room. Across the street are classrooms, and the preschool at the time only occupied 1 small room in the corner with a youth room adjacent on the other side. Over here, the kitchen is roughly where it's been. However, as you see here, the classroom, that's the small sanctuary, much smaller in design and size than what we have today. The second comma floor plan. It's confusing, I know. When I went in there, I'm like, first floor plan was different, that's before Rabbi Babin's. I know, it's very, yeah. I thought the same thing, and I'm like, wait a minute, no, this is the second comma floor plan, and they date it, and there's a little document at the bottom that says 1 of 2 or 2 of 2. All right. By April of 1950, the temple leadership was ready to lay its cornerstone, despite the building not being ready. In a surprise to me, I learned from this letter from April of 1950 that our cornerstone, which is out there in the front and has the date of 1950 on it, actually inside of it there is a copper box, which I assume is a time capsule. Although I have no idea what was inside of it, what was placed inside of it, but the description here was actually done. There's a receipt for a copper box. So somebody put a copper box in there, and there's a hole, presumably inside. It tells you exactly how big it is, and it's inside of the cornerstone. So if anyone wants to consider a future uncovering of that, that's something to think about. They had a full-page ad taken out. This is in the Chicago Daily News for the ceremony. And they didn't have a picture of the synagogue, they had the model. So as you can see, there's the model. Around this time, about May 1950, And nearly a year after that commentary article that Rabbi Babin had read about employing young Jewish artists to work on synagogues, and just a couple weeks after the letter we had seen to Al Newman about the design elements of the synagogue, the architects of Lobo, Schlossman, and Bennett reached out to sculptor Milton Horn for the first time about a commission of a sculptured relief on the exterior for West Suburban Temple. Horn, this is him, he was 43 years old at the time. He had just moved to Chicago, specifically to Hyde Park, from Michigan, where he had been teaching at Mount Olivet College. We don't know exactly how Horn came to the synagogue's attention, but in later years, Mr. Schlossman would say that Richard Bennett, who was the newest member of the firm, Lobo, Schlossman, and Bennett, may have heard of him or recommended him. Bennett is among Lobo, Schlossman, and Bennett. Lobo is Jewish, Schlossman is Jewish, Bennett is not Jewish. Bennett, however, was the primary designer of the Loop Synagogue, so a fun fact. Horn himself had been advocating to do sculptural work for synagogues. In 1947, he had addressed a conference of the Reform movement, specifically about architecture and design of synagogues, in order to assert the Jewish custom that had allegedly prohibited graven images was historically inaccurate, and Jews had once adorned their synagogues as late as the Byzantine era with pictorial images and other decorative arts representing human and other representational art expression. He said it was time to reclaim this tradition. And you can see in this letter, in response, his eagerness to do the work. He says in this letter, the work means much to him, not only because I see here an opportunity to demonstrate the integration of organic sculpture with organic synagogue architecture, but also because I know what an important function the whole project has to perform in the community. Now, that's an interesting, you could take that two ways. Does it mean the Jewish community, or does it mean the Gentile community of River Forest? I interpret it more as the latter, but I'm not sure. It could be both. It can be interpreted both ways. In response to that letter, the synagogue went ahead and hired Horn, and so we have the response letter to him from Al Newman. But it noted in the letter, it is important that he speak to Rabbi Babin to discuss the theme to be portrayed in the sculpture. And so just to give a context of what Milton Horn was doing at the time, he had not done anything as large as what we have in front of our building at the time. He was doing mostly smaller scale sculptural work and sometimes some bas relief work in interiors of homes. The bowl is probably the closest thing we have to what is the behemoth on the outside, and we'll get into it in a second. This is from 1947, but he was already working on Jewish themes, and so in 1948, just before this project, he had made this. It's actually quite small. It's about this size. It's a sculpture of Job, and I think it's very moving, but you get a sense of the large hands at the bottom that are kind of exaggerated, which we see on the exterior of our building. So, Horn would end up discussing the theme of the work with Rabbi Babin. Babin had already selected a quote from Scripture from the book of Zechariah, not by might nor by power, so saith the Lord of hosts. Apparently, I have since learned this was the favorite verse of Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, who founded the Reconstructionist movement, but at the time was, I believe, head of the Jewish Theological Seminary. Babin actually knew Kaplan personally from his time at the Jewish Theological Seminary in the early 1940s. Babin, about a year later, said this in the Shul Bulletin about the reason he selected the verse. We live in a world beset by tensions and by struggles of conscience which have reduced themselves to the call of war and the clamor of arms. How fitting, then, that in the midst of this whirlwind of physical prowess, of marching men and of shooting guns, that we remind ourselves that in the end none of these things avail unless the Spirit of God abides with us. So there's really a very kind of, this is obviously a very strong image, right? But it's an image of faith over, Milton Horn gets into it a bit too, but it's an image of faith destroying this behemoth that is the concepts of iniquity, war, all these concepts that faith holds above and aloft. So the idea also that we're in an immediate post-war era, we're only 4 or 5 years out from the Holocaust, that it's the nuclear age, and all these things are kind of in the ether, so to speak. Horn produced several sketches in this time, gave them to Babin. We don't have any of them, but one of them was good enough, and on the basis of the approval of Rabbi Babin, Horn went to work later that summer. He would complete work on this. This is the half-size plaster model. This is a half-size version made out of plaster of what is on the side of the building. And in the spring of 1951, work began on carving the 10 tons of limestone that were used in the face of the building. It was actually supported by steel beams, still is, presumably, and is 10 feet by 12 feet as you go out there. Horn actually did not sculpt the building version of this. This was the big reveal and surprise for me. I assumed that he was the one working out there and that would be his scaffolding and him out there. It was actually a Polish sculptor that Horn personally oversaw and hired named Władysław Gawliński, who was Chicago, he was originally from Poland, came here in the 1920s from Poland to Chicago, and actually did a lot of church work, and he had a lot of sculptures in churches in Glen Ellen. He did the same kind of work there, but here he was executing Milton Horn's work. Horn actually later, when the work was completed, provided his own interpretation that he gave to the show, and this was actually published, it cut it off a little bit, that's a shame. But you just literally have the description, the winged cherubim. This is a very militant-looking cherubim. It's not Moses. It is a four-eyed, two-faced angel with a flame-like head, all-seeing, with eyes like burning embers, holds aloft the commandments, the ethical code not only of Judaism, but for the whole of Western civilization. It rises above the earthbound behemoth. You hear him screaming this behemoth, looks like the bull that we saw in the previous image. In fact, taking description from the book of Job, so again, a very graphic descriptions in Job. The behemoth trusteth he can draw up Jordan into his mouth, taketh it with his eyes, his nose piercing, piercing through snares. And then in the background, and I didn't even notice this until years later, you have the budding springs, which are supposed to be like the branches of the menorah, coming up from behind the commandments to the heavens. And from the hidden roots of the menorah, the flames of the Spirit are beginning to transfigure the behemoth. So you have them actually burning him from below. It's really a visceral image, I would say. And he described it a little bit later in 1962. It grew out of the physical conditions and spiritual needs, not that of mere sign, but illustration and decoration, but an affirmation of faith, which is really what it's metaphorically supposed to symbolize. But what of the construction of the synagogue itself, which was also going on? Well, shortly after engaging Horn, Rabbi Babin turned to the traditional Jewish elements of a synagogue and what was required in the space that needed to be put into the building. First was, what was it going to be written over the bima? There was supposed to be something that's supposed to go over the bima. Babin selected what we have today, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, how goodly is thy dwelling place, which obviously is a very fitting description for the sanctuary of a synagogue. Actually, if you skip one ahead, this is the actual original artist's rendering, which was finalized and made in this beautiful form for us in 1953. But the original sketches have Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad as the original design, and at some point that was replaced with Babin's specific thing. The other question, and this is on the previous slide, but what to do with the Yizkor plaques? There's these Yizkor plaques, and Babin's like, the architects don't want them filling up the main sanctuary. This is a perpetual synagogue problem. So the suggestion was made to get a Yizkor holder, basically a holder that would be used and replaced, and Charles knows this problem all too well because every week Charles is the one who screws out the old ones and puts in the new ones. But this was originally suggested by Rabbi Babin as an idea, so we have him to thank. And we of course have a very ornate one right here, also designed by Milton Horn years later in 1963. I have to imagine there was an earlier version of it before that one. And then if you go back again, sorry, two back. Forward, sorry. Yeah, sorry. One more from this? Yeah, and so you see here the empty glass. The idea was that when we fully open this, that there would be light streaming from not just the back, but also from the side. And obviously we have the grappa windows here, which are beautiful. But original concept was that there would be sun coming in from the east windows. One more. Yeah. Finally, Rabbi Babin was faced with the perennial problem that all Reform and conservative congregations face: what to do on the high holidays. How do you build a sanctuary that can accommodate 4 or 5 times the usual number of attendees that you would see on a given Shabbat? How do you maintain a space that would otherwise seem cavernous on a Friday night? And so we saw the initial solution that Rabbi Babin had come to was, we'll just do moving walls. But Lobo Schlossman pushed, and sometime over the summer of 1950, a delegation of 2 of the board members actually traveled to South Bend, Indiana, where they saw the just completed synagogue that they had built, Temple Bethel, which had the movable ark. And so, in addition, they also visited Temple Shalom, which had the very early version of this from 1925. The 2 delegates reported this was impressive, and in this letter that Rabbi Babin actually wrote to an architectural student at McGill University, he is being asked about this problem, and he says this is how we solved it. The architectural student, Stan Seaman, actually built a lot of public housing structures in Montreal, so he became a quite established architect at this point, later in life in the 1960s, but here he was still a student, apparently considering a synagogue project. The moving ark, I think, was supposed to, per Rabbi Babin, seat up to 1,000. I'm not sure we actually get all the way to 1,000, but it's maybe plausible. So, one more, Charles, if you could. These are the original architectural plans for the movable ark, and so you can kind of see the level of detail. Here's the ark, here's the wheels for the ark to be moved, here's the sort of platform, a view of it from the side, so you can see how it moves. I think it's very cool. I actually had a conversation earlier this week with Barb Young's uncle, who is 97 years old, and when he was but a young man of 23, he worked for the steel installation company that had built this synagogue. And he remembers that his job was to put the wheels, which are made out of steel, and the bima steel. So it's really one big super steel structure. And I think as you can see below you maybe you've considered these, the tracks go right here, and they went before when it wasn't wood, when it was made out of some kind of linoleum asbestos material. But they've always been here, and I think these are still, I assume, all the original steel tracks that had been there since 1950. So the construction was good. Babin did, however, notice that the curtain for the ark was missing. The design elements were so detailed that even the curtain for the ark had to be considered by the designers. So even here at the end of February, he's complaining, why hasn't this been done yet? We've noticed that you guys are behind schedule, work has been left in the middle, so there's tension going on here. And so this is the project in mid-construction, basically almost done. I think this is taken probably in the early part of 1951. The building was initially supposed to open on June 1st with a celebratory event, June 1st, 1951. There were invitations that were printed, they had hired a press agent, but the building wasn't ready. Due to all of these small changes I just discussed, there was also an installation of a phone line in the coat room that happened at the last second. The construction was behind schedule and over budget. The letter I just showed you really gets, skip ahead. This is actually a construction of what would become Gottlieb Hall, but I wanted to point out this is what it would have looked like. That's the ark from the back with nothing, because Gottlieb Hall was going to be built as a second stage 2 years later. So, yes? That's right. I think that was an expansion. They had the land, but I think that they had that one designed later in the 1950s. I'm not positive about that, though, but it doesn't come up in the initial plans for the expansion for Gottlieb. This is Milton Horn in front of the finished work. So the work was basically done, and so you get a sense of how it looked. Go ahead, Charles. So here you get a sense of the frustrations. This is a letter from the general contractor, Kleinfeld Construction, where they're upset that they're needed for June 1st construction. June 1st is the big date, and they tell them, this is not going to happen. We have endeavored to reply with every request made by your office, and we feel proud in stating that our accomplishment has been outstanding, particularly when it is understood that the construction of this building required many instances, special materials, special methods of installation. We have to inform you that we need an additional payment of $16,000. It is not possible for us to be ready by June 1st, and so this becomes a dispute over the course. It's eventually resolved, but they're not ready. But June 3rd, they are ready. So 2 days later, they're ready, and they move in. The Sentinel had a kind of half-page article about the move-in date. On June 21st, they took out an ad in the Forest Leaves welcoming visitors. They actually provided tours for non-Jewish people who wanted to visit the synagogue and see the interior of the synagogue. That year, however, they still didn't have enough space for high holidays, so they had to reserve Pilgrim Congregational Church, which they had been doing for 4 or 5 years in order to accommodate the several hundreds of people that came from the high holidays then. This is actually the architects themselves. Richard Bennett, I mentioned him earlier, he actually published a book in 1953, co-authored a book about the general design of churches and temples, and he specifically had a section on our synagogue, and he mentions, I think a couple of things I think are worth pointing out. This is him just literally describing what we'd asked for. The congregation of River Forest, Illinois required a building that would harmonize with its neighbors in materials and scale. The desire was reinforced by a belief that from earliest times the synagogue has been a neighborhood institution related to daily life and domestic forms, warm and friendly. Though site setbacks ruled out a freer plan, which was the original plan, it was possible to contrast the simple mass of the sanctuary with a series of very low-pitched roofs and wide overhangs. Informality is continued into the raised terrace, and the walk pattern is planned so that everyone is invited to take a short cut through the front lawn. And so I thought that was a bit interesting. I didn't know that we originally encouraged people to walk through our lawn, but that was the original plan. And then they mentioned the Milton Horn statue as well, and of course the moving walk. But I thought it was really interesting for the contrast of the community aspects of it that I didn't really think of, but Richard Bennett thought very highly of. The horn sculpture, I think I mentioned earlier that they hired a press agent. So they hired a press agent sometime in the fall of 1951, which is about when the sculpture was completed. The press agent, made Milton Horn and Rabbi Babin available to all the press. And as a result of that press attention, and almost immediately upon completion, there was coverage of what they deemed the controversy. The controversy being that the sculpture with its representational imagery was some kind of breaking of the taboo of graven image on a synagogue building. So they ended up in the Chicago Tribune. They had tried to get coverage in the Tribune and tried to get coverage in the Sentinel, but at some point they got coverage in the Associated Press. And once they were in the Associated Press, things go out on the wire and you get all these crazy stories that get more and more scandalous, and sometimes you get like language such as this is actually graven imagery and so on. So Babin himself actually commented on this controversy in 1952, and he said he would get newspaper clippings from all over the world through the syndication. There was articles from Australia that were sent to him. They all say synagogue gets graven image, which is not what he intended, and in fact the opposite of what he was arguing for. But eventually he says this became a tempest in a teapot and died down, and in fact his own congregation, he said, loved the work, which is illuminated at night and was always planned to be illuminated at night. So here's an early image of the synagogue illuminated at night, as we kind of see today, with its own flood lighting that was different than the ones we have now. After the main sanctuary was done, it took another 1.5 years for the main community hall, which was going to be named the Gottlieb Hall, to be completed. This cost an additional $200,000. It necessitated more tracking, so more tracking had to be built, more steel had to be laid down, and an expanded kitchen, and all of that, including the stage, was completed in late 1953. In 1954, we had the final entry of the, it was the big event, the big dedication service. Fundraising had begun as early as Kol Nidre in 1952. In the fall of 1953, there was a fundraising event which featured television personality Jimmy Durante, apparently, and it came out here somehow. I have no pictures of it, but it's in the newspaper. The dedication service took place on March 21st of 1954. Second-term U.S. House Representative Sidney Yates, who's in the middle there, he was our guest of honor, and he spoke, and apparently I can find his speech in the Chicago History Museum, so I may try to recover that at one point. And that really was kind of the end of the construction. I just wanted to go through a couple of these slides just for the old interior space. This is a picture from 1964. This is Rabbi Tabachnik's first week. And you get the sense of the bima as it looked then and how it was different from the way it looks today. A couple more angles. This is, of course, Cantor Brindell with the choir, and we had the piano. And the Ner Tamid, which was hanging in a different location, I think, than it is today, in a different way. A sense of how Gottlieb Hall appeared from when it was completely filled with seats. Here's the old floor of Gottlieb Hall. Yeah, so, okay. Another angle of the same place. This is basically like looking at ourselves today in the mirror, cast back 65 years. But as you see, of course, the windows are different because this is before the grappa windows. And then here's the classroom. This is the classroom that is now the small sanctuary with, I think, what was a sort of vertical moving accordion wall. And then this is Rabbi Babin's library, which was adjacent to his office, which is now one of the preschool rooms, the first one on the right as you go past Claudine's office. And then the basement. What do you do with this basement? Well, apparently sock hops. No, this was the youth groups met in the basement. That was sort of the plan as set by the 1953 plan for Gottlieb Hall and the completion of the building. So you got, the teen groups playing in the basement, and I guess these guys playing sack races. Just one other thing to briefly touch on. In the late 1960s, I think either the synagogue or JUF started conversations that ended up not going anywhere, but potentially expanding the synagogue and building a sort of a Jewish community center attachment to it. And so I actually found these sketches in the archives at the Art Institute that Lobo, Schlossman, and Bennett, now then known as Lobo, Schlossman, Bennett, and Dart, they'd added a partner, had drawn up. The idea was to build basically an expanded section here. It would have, I think, a gym in the downstairs. So the long sought-after basketball court would be here. And there would be classrooms on the second floor. They would also have knocked out, I think, or lowered our roof or our ceiling so that we would have kind of more of a drop ceiling, and there would be an ability to expand classrooms and other facilities on a second floor. And so if you skip here, you can see kind of the conception of a lowered ceiling. So the ceiling would be lowered, and the bima curtain imagery of the Ten Commandments, where they would be before, would have been raised. And so as to give some of the perspective of it being not so low. So I included in this also pictures of William Gropper and the Gropper windows, which were installed in, I believe, 1968. Here's Rabbi Tabachnik to the left, and several of the visiting nuns from the Dominican order down the street. I won't go into the Gropper windows. Everyone here has probably heard a lot about the Gropper windows, but that is actually a picture of William Gropper. We don't get a lot of pictures of him, so I thought I would include this one. And that is all I have for today. Thank you guys so much. Please.
Was at the South, before he came here, was at the South Synagogue.
Oh, really?
He was comfortable with this bima before he came here.
Oh, that's very interesting. So if you guys didn't hear that, Len said Cantor Brindell was at the Temple Beth El synagogue. It was a Reform synagogue before he was here. Sadly, I just learned that in 2023, Temple Beth El officially is closed. So we may have, besides Temple Shalom, one of the only movable, and you still used arcs like this. Sorry, Cindy, you had a question?
Do you know any history about building an ark on other than the east wall? You can't hear the mic.
Yeah, I can, hold on. But I'll repeat her question for now. Her question was, do I know of any other synagogues that have built their ark facing a direction that is not the east wall?
What consideration?
It's strangely not brought up at all. Because it's even in the original conception from 1947, they didn't have it. My assumption is this. They had come from a building in Lake Street where they were also facing north. So this was like kind of, there was no way for them to face east. So my thinking is that maybe they didn't care enough about it. The synagogue, just in very brief, the community that existed before Rabbi Babin was more ecumenically half Reform, half conservative. It was not so hidebound to any particular specific tradition. And in fact, as you saw from some of those pictures, the same space that was a bima was also where they had a hootenanny. So my thinking is that they were concerned that they have the synagogue and not so concerned about certain traditions about east walls versus not having east walls.
Yeah, you guys, there were a lot of Reform temples that essentially didn't build their parks on the east wall because they were rejected.
Hold on a second. If the people who are on Zoom can't hear anything unless we use the microphone.
That's fair.
So Mike,
Too, by the way.
I had heard, just in hearing about some of the history of Anshe Emet in Lakeview, which was originally Temple Shalom. It was built as Temple Shalom, a Reform temple, and it faces west also. And the explanation that was given to me is that Reform temples, and particularly, were designed opposite of conservative and particularly Orthodox because they were rejecting the idea of like return to Zion, like Mashiach is not a thing, the Messiah is not a thing we're waiting for, we're building our temple right here and now. So it's appropriate, if you're saying that the old synagogue was,
Yeah, no, what you're saying is true. What you're saying is true. By 1948, when they start the plan, Babin is firmly in control. I will say, reading the letters, he very much took charge of this project. This was very much his project, and he was very much a member of the conservative movement. And in fact, he I think, affiliated the synagogue officially with the was then known as the UJA. But I wonder if he was concerned about that, or if he had much more important things he was trying to deal with, and that was a relatively small concern. And like you said, I'm not sure what is minhag and what is, as opposed, a custom versus a requirement. I don't think it's a requirement.
Okay, I'd just like to say that I've been in lots of synagogues where the bima was in another direction other than east. I grew up, the synagogue, Orthodox synagogue that my parents belonged to faced west, and that was because it was on the west side of the street, and you entered from the back, and the bima was at the other end.
I was going to say, it's not that uncommon, because, what makes more sense practically for a synagogue, whenever there's no halakha, you have to build a synagogue, and when you have a Torah, you pray towards the Torah and not towards, if the Torah is in a different direction than Jerusalem.
And the story that I've heard is partly based on that passage of the law in River Forest, that they made sure that we had to be X number of feet from Harlem. And we needed to have X number of spots for parking, and there needed to be parking along the back as a drive to get out. So that the footprint was fairly well set by the limitations that River Forest put on us. I had heard through innuendo, I don't have any way to confirm it, that they created rules that would make it very challenging to put up a synagogue in a way to discourage certain pieces for us. And so you also had to work with the space that you had. And as the rabbi just said, if you want to have a bima and you want to have a room that's able to be filled with people for the high holidays, you can't really put anything east because we're limited as to how wide the building is. So when you put together a plan, partly it's by necessity, as you've just said.
Thank you. Got one in the back. Hi, Raya.
Hi, I've got 3 questions for you, or 2 questions and a request. First one, were Oak Park or River Forest both creating problems or less welcoming? Was one more welcoming than the other? Second, regarding the congregation, do you know, and this may be a question you may not know, were there a lot of Holocaust survivors? Did that in any way color the experience or what ended up happening? And lastly, can you make the text or the slides available so we can actually read the articles?
The third thing I can do for sure, not a problem. Okay, the first question I'll try to be brief about it because I did talk about it at length in the presentation I made in the spring. The short answer is yes. Oak Park and River Forest made it quite difficult for us to build a synagogue. Oak Park made it so difficult that we gave up. In 1939, they originally presented plans to expand and rebuild on top of the property that they owned on that 414 Lake Street. It's actually probably in late 1939, somewhere around then. Plans were presented. I know this because Sam Schmetterer, who was the president of the synagogue in the late 40s, wrote a history of sorts that he gave at the dedication of this hall. So he gave this story in the hall, and I have the text of it was donated to the Chicago History Museum, the Oak Park River Forest History Museum, and it resides there, and I read it. So he wrote this in 1952. He says that in late 1939, they presented a building plan for a rebuild of a synagogue in this property, and that it sat with them for a while. And then in January of 1940, or February of 1940, they came back to the synagogue membership and said, oh, hey, do you guys know about this ordinance? You need, if you're located within the Oak Park Village limits and you're trying to build a synagogue or temple or church or sanitarium or hospital or a few other things that they had just recently added, then you need to get the neighbors, something like 51% of your neighbors. This was called a frontage consent kind of ordinance. You need to get 51% of your neighbors within 400 feet to sign on and say, we're okay with the specific construction plans. Oh, and by the way, anytime between now and when you start digging, they can revoke their consent. So it's basically a neighbor's veto. When did they pass that ordinance? January of 1940. So while they were sitting with this pending application, and while the real estate, separately, the real estate concerns were very concerned that too many Jews were coming into Oak Park, and they actually wrote in a document that we have by chance because they were sent to Washington, D.C. as part of a loan agency in quite clear form. They were concerned that due to the peculiar, I'm quoting it basically, due to the peculiar habit of Jews walking to temple, the northeast section of Oak Park had possibility of too much Hebrew infiltration, their words. And so they were very concerned, and so they suggested that unless something is done, and the synagogue looks like it's going to need to expand, the area will be downgraded. And so they were going to downgrade it from what was known as a blue zone to a yellow zone. If you've heard of redlining, these are the colors. Yellow is before red. And so within 2 weeks of that, an ordinance is passed that all of a sudden requires consent from everybody. Then the war happens, and so there's no construction materials for anybody. And so they put the plan on hold. But by the end of World War II, the Shoal community had grown from about 150 members to about 300 members. And no matter what they were going to do in that land space, they were never going to build something big enough for what they had planned. And so then they find out about this land in River Forest. They buy it, as I showed you, through a straw buyer, which really suggests to you how nervous they were that it would also happen there. And then within 8 months of them buying the land, or 10 months of them buying the land, you have the parking lot ordinance. And the second ordinance they pass is the exact same ordinance River Oak Park had passed in 1940, the frontage consent ordinance. So they need the same 400 feet, all neighbors within 25 feet. This time, and you find it in the village, the board minutes of the synagogue, they were prepared. And so Rabbi Babin, who joins in late 48, and a number of members of the community start actually going into the community and making sure that they have the support of their neighbors for what they're planning to do. But what they're really thinking is, they also have lawyers. They have Schmetterer, and they have this gentleman named Louis Shapiro who taught at DePaul University College of Law. They're both members of the board. And they decide, hey, we're going to toss this strategy, and we're going to actually fight. And so they actually meet with the lawyer for River Forest. And then what seems to happen is the River Forest lawyer is like, we would be on shaky constitutional ground to do this. And then all you have is the village board minutes. I actually foiled the village board minutes. And what they decided to do is, let's have a special committee, and the committee will meet and discuss whether this is in fact appropriate for us to have this ordinance in place. And lo and behold, they scheduled that meeting to occur on Yom Kippur, 1949. So on Yom Kippur, 1949, Rabbi Babin walks from our shul down to River Forest's Village Hall and presents an argument as to why it shouldn't be, along with the lawyers. And then out of that meeting, we only know what the result was. They recommend that the ordinance not be enforced. So the ordinance that would have required all the neighbors is not enforced. The parking lot ordinance is enforced. So the parking space ordinance. So that's the story of that. Quickly, your second question, I forgot it. Yes, there were a few Holocaust survivors who came here. We have a letter Rabbi Babin got, which I might bring out in the event in November, from a gentleman named Gregory Abrams, who was a Holocaust survivor with a wife and a 10-year-old son. And the letter is, Rabbi Babin, I need a place to, we're looking for a new place to live. Where is a good place in Oak Park River Forest where a Jewish person can get an apartment to rent? And two, I don't think I can afford the dues. Is there a way that I can be on a plan so we can afford? I am also very sorry. We're only 1 year out from displaced persons camp, and we have to work very, very hard. So we haven't been able to make Shabbat. So the Shabbat services. And so Rabbi Babin writes back to him, or he writes actually to the building, to the membership drive, accept the $30 as sufficient and the plan that they suggest, and write him a letter saying as much. So there were a few. I'm not sure how many there were already. I know that many of the Holocaust survivors ended up going to places like Skokie and some of the other North Shore neighborhoods, northern suburbs, but.
In the 50s, we did have at least one or maybe two Hebrew teachers.
In the 50s, we did have at least one or maybe two Hebrew school teachers, I think two for sure, who were Holocaust survivors as well, including Mark Kupferstock and Gavert Lewinson, if I remember right.
Okay. I think this would be a good time for us to transition to the second part of our program. If anyone wants to grab coffee or desserts, I think a lot of stuff has been laid out, including hot food. I see some things, so some hot food. Sorry, Linda, went a little long, but there were always questions.
What else is new? It's good. It's
Yeah.
very good.
All right.
Window frames are the original window.
I think so, yeah.
And then they just
They just like kind of put in
the pieces, but the original design was to be more fluid, but I don't think the structure would take it. Pardon? These are the original windows that were clear,
the frames.
frames, but the original design, I think, had very thin breaking between the glass, but it involved completely remaking these steel frames.
And I remember the bottom two windows were frosted glass.
Right, but these are,
Oh, for privacy.
Right. Yeah. And they opened.
right.
Well, so you needed
Support-
heat. Yeah, because there was no good AC.
Right, but there was no, but
protect you from the
but the design of the art was in split with the big
All right.
spaces. It was very thin.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you.
I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thanks.
He is we really should change it. He's the chair and I'm the co-chair. Really.
I think we're both co-chair.
Well,
Yeah.
but you're doing the work and I'm doing the work.
Well, you,
I need your cover, Len, for when people get offended.
you were-
Like I misrepresent something. So,
fabulous.
okay, I'm glad
you
you
were
did that.
him before he came.
Incredible, but the artwork is more fluid. And there was a big debate whether, I think.
The pictures. Yeah.
Picture was,
I've seen them.
and they had to make a decision whether to
Be literal.
to make these thinner or use, I don't know if it was cost or structure because it's so big. And this was one of the first times they used this technique.
I know. I've read it. Mark Sopek.
Yeah.
I've heard him talk about it. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Where it's now very common, but it's literally a piece of glass and then they melt it so it fuses. And I don't think they had it's like maybe 3 times the weight of a normal stained glass, traditional like in a church or in a temple.
Yeah.
It may be 3 times the weight. And I
It's
think,
very, very heavy. It's very
Yeah.
thick, which is good. I feel like as a security measure, it's good that we have the super thick glass.
right, but the
Throws anything
technique
out.
though, I think it was the first time this technique was used in such a big space.
Yeah.
And to support this height, I don't think they have the technology to do that. I think this guy is dead.
Oh no, he very much is dead. He died in like the late 70s. Yeah. He was already. We got him when he was like My understanding is he was basically like hard up for work because he was labeled a communist in the 50s, and he really couldn't get even cartooning work. And so somebody in our committee, art committee, I guess, knew about him and got him this project.
Imagine you do the drawing.
The drawings are crazy compared to this. And then the guy who actually did the glass is this Lithuanian artist.
Is he?
Yeah. He's actually, if you look over here, it's signed differently. See? Oh. Valeska. So he was the manufacturer of the glass, and he actually placed the glass in a configuration that Grapper. They're very different, yeah. I'm curious. I mean, the limestone on the side of the building weighs apparently multiple tons, so like that's pretty crazy too.
They're using this.
It was like
They were
unique,
making,
right?
I remember they were making a decision, and I saw the art, and they were going to cut it all up.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, so that might be some of the reasons whether it was a cost factor or a structural.
You know who knows almost all of it is Mark. Stopik read all of the, he has the minutes that he's read. And so they have all these discussions. It's really funny to read these things because they're so detailed about like cost overruns, and it's like your brain kind of like melts from it. But
I never did get the answer why they did it, you know. But was it structural or was it financial? Because this was, they fit right into these panels, but they made a decision to cut the artwork off.
yeah, and divide it up. Hey,
So I just found out, I won't tell you who told me, that you play the clarinet,
I do.
so we have to play some duets.
I'm just terrible at it. I haven't played in 20 years.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Is it
All right,
on the
Linda.
railroad?
Let's kick it off. All right.
The tracks? In the tracks, railroad tracks?
Basically, yeah. I mean, Charles can show them to you. Come on Friday morning.
I've seen
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was real from a real railroad.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they are standard gauge. I think they might be smaller, like narrow gauge or something. They're not meant for full-size railroads.
So I didn't know if it was a real crane track.
Ready whenever you are. Rabbi came to tell me we need to do this.
Are you going to give me directions about when, or is this?
We'll skip through as we go. I'll let Linda guide conversation. And if everything comes up, I'll flip through because I think they're chronologically kind of aligned with these kind of questions.
I mean, I don't really know what's on the slides.
It's a lot of the pictures I sent you before,
Naked
basically.
pictures of me, you know.
Yeah, with an oboe, a bassoon.
Chronological.
All right. I think we'll come back and start the second half of the program here. If everybody can make their way back to their seat. All right. Just stand up. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to introduce my co-panelist in this question and answer session, Linda Bisberg. Some of you may remember her, know her as Linda Abrams. Linda is a trained interior designer, was formerly a Frank Lloyd Wright home and studio interpreter here in Oak Park. Beginning in 1992, Linda worked on the Kadima Committee, which redesigned, in many ways, Temple Har Zion in the 1990s. As we will discuss, under the leadership and guidance of Rabbi Victor Millman, the Kadima capital campaign that began in 1992 and continued through construction in, I think, 1996, modernized and reimagined the interior space of our synagogue while also making needed updates. Linda is currently also a ceramic artist living in Evanston. Please welcome Linda Bisberg. So Linda, I just gave kind of like the 10-second version of what Kadima was. Can you tell me how you ended up getting involved in the Kadima campaign and what it was?
How I got
Well, what it was and maybe how you got involved in what it was.
I got involved because I was on the preschool committee, and the preschool committee never had enough room, and, you know, there were always things that were in our bucket list and our wish list. And I believe it was Alan Perez who came to a meeting that we had, And we were pretty passionate. It was a bunch of new members and moms, and we wanted to bring our children into the show, and we wanted things to grow with our children so that they could get the most out of the space. And he said, you know, you should be a part of the Kadima campaign because we're looking at redoing the synagogue, and you should have your voice there, and you should see how that process is going. So that's how I came to the Kadima campaign with a background in design, and met John Thorpe, who was the architect who was doing that. And a lot of it was that we were bulging at the seams. There were a lot of great ideas of programs we wanted to host and things that we wanted to do in our space, but the space just was not supporting all of this vision that was coming up with the new, at the time, I know I see a lot of faces here that I know, the new congregants at the time wanting to have new activities, new education, lots of exciting ideas.
That's very helpful. I think I have some pictures that I can show that were like, basically, I'll call them the parade of horrible pictures from the before. So, I don't know, I found these in our synagogue basement. They're snapshots that were taken on Polaroids, and that sort of show the issues that were plaguing, I think, the synagogue in the early 90s. Some of them were also, and I discovered this, were fire code problems. And so you kind of have misuse of code storage in places that were not meant for it, this fire safety code violation up here, electrical outlets placed above water fountains over there at the bottom, yeah, and then plaster issues in the preschool area. So we have a preschool picture, damaged plaster ceiling at the playground access at the preschool pickup area. So move one more here. And here's some of the Gottlieb Hall, asbestos floor, electrical floor outlet is malfunctioning, covered in duct tape, and then there was water damage that had apparently occurred due to some leaks on the upper floors. And so you get kind of a sense of what was considered and what was needed. You mentioned architect John Thorpe, so can you describe for me who he is and what his involvement was?
John Thorpe was a preservation architect, very, I think you had it in your notes there. He was recognized by the state of Illinois, had done really an amazing amount of work. He was a part of the Frank Lloyd Wright Home and Studio Hole in the Wall gang. And that was a group of people who actually, with very little money, wanted to rehab the home and studio. He was living there for a while. The story I told earlier today was that he was living there and it was raining and he could hear the rain coming down, and he got up in the middle of the night with a hammer and started breaking down the drywall in the studio space and actually found the chain system, if any of you have gone on a tour there, that holds the entire studio up. Nobody knew that was how that space had been constructed until he started tearing down the walls. So he really loved buildings, and buildings are a language and an art, and we don't really interpret buildings as a language and an art and a living organism that supports humans and interacts with them, and he really believed that. When I started on the project, the one problem was that John listened to everybody equally. And when you come to a synagogue and you ask everybody what do they want and what's most important, there's an awful lot of things that were on the table, and he took them all equal. So I was able to help sort of, with an interior design background, to sort through all the voices and begin to pull them into categories and to be able to group them together so that solutions could be more universal. John started looking at lots of specific little solutions to things and was not able to, it was too difficult. You know, when you listen to all the voices at once, it's too noisy. When you start to pull them together in a harmonious way, you can begin to put together a plan that addresses something that works for everybody. So that would be one of the places. And it did mean that there were more multifunctional spaces. So John had tried to address each and everything, and the whole building was built around the ultimate multifunctional space. You know, it's built with this wall that moves. And if you take that as one of the major successes of this building, why not make that true for elsewhere in the building? You know, that the preschool didn't have to have, at the time, I've heard it's different now, a specific space, you could share that space, that the library doesn't have to just be a library, it can be a library in a classroom, that the chapel cannot be just a chapel, but it can be a place where we gather, so that the space begins to allow us to live in it and respond with us in a harmonious way.
Actually got to my second question, which was what were the sort of inspirational ideas that informed the redesign? It sounds like the concept of having a multifunctional space was a really big part of it. Any other ideas that, you remember were sort of thematically expressed through Thorpe's plans?
I think that the other piece is the way light works in the building. The building was fairly dark at the time. Moving the gift shop into the location that it's in did multiple things. It gave the gift shop, and there were lots of various ideas that came to that. We are the farthest west, correct? And so we wanted to have a place where people could see Judaica and purchase candles, because you couldn't buy them everywhere. And we wanted to not have to unpack that every time somebody wanted to purchase something. But it also gave the ability to bring in light. And by bringing light in and opening the space, it allowed you to use that front foyer more. So that front foyer, instead of just a transverse place that you walk through, can be a place where you sit, can be a place where you meet, and that was a very significant piece to bring the light in and allow that space to be a more livable, welcoming area.
And I had the pleasure of speaking to Rabbi Merriman earlier this week about some of these redesign ideas, and he recalled to me that the place there's a gift shop used to be his office. Is that right?
Say that one more time.
He says that the place that we now see as the gift shop was before that his office. Yeah. Which he said it was great to move that upstairs for a number of reasons, but one of which was that he didn't always have to hear people coming, because it was where the people would come in and out of the preschool and they would hang out, and so they'd hang out right in front of his office. And so it was like,
Yes.
he couldn't get a lot of work done in the mornings and in the afternoons.
So the reverb here made it hard for me to hear. Yes, that's exactly. His office was down there on the first floor, and there was a lot of concern about moving that up to the second floor. And so that's some of the things that began to happen, is how do you address one concern, and then it causes another concern. So to try to get consensus to see how that overall works, it felt like he was going to be too far from the congregation if he wasn't right on the first floor. But obviously that works now. So it's sometimes change is challenging, but it has a harmonious effect and begins to allow us to know that the building lives, the building breathes, and it has to interact with us and be flexible in order to support all the ideas and the ways we want to use the space.
I also have to ask, because I just went through slides where a bowling alley was suggested. Was there ever any ideas that got really close, then they didn't make it? Or
That basketball court has been around in concept for a very, very long time, yes. There was a push for a basketball court again, yes.
Is that right? Okay. Can I speaking more generally, you have a concept that you have a background in interior design, and you obviously thought very deeply about the interior spaces of synagogues. What are some of the ways in which modern synagogues, and maybe this one in particular, are designed to create kind of an atmosphere for sort of religious observance, for gathering, for a kind of a holy space?
I'd actually like to take that even broader. I mean,
Please.
we've talked about this as our shul and our history, but we're within a greater context. If you go back in time to any religious space, I would break spaces down into types. There's restaurants, and there's homes, and there's religious spaces. And each one of those has sort of a language. And I think you can see, could you go to the image of the front of the shul, from the terrace? Any one of them would be great if you go back. That one's good. Does that look similar to anybody? I mean, does that have a Frank Lloyd Wright long roof feel to it? So all of this is being done in a context and language of architecture and the changes of the times. And actually, if you go back to the Milton Horn sculpture, which will take you a while to get back to that one.
It's in a different slideshow.
It's a different slideshow. Well, the Milton Horn might look a little bit to somebody like a Braque or a Picasso, where they do a cubist painting. And a cubist painting is something that looks at something not being in one spot. You're looking at it from multiple points of view, and it could also be in multiple times. There's new descending a staircase, which it isn't about that one moment. It's about where they came from, it's in transition and where it's going to. And there's some of that when you look at the horn, and he did not get his degree in art without knowing what else was happening in the world. So I would use that as a background as I start to talk. We have a front lawn, and I would love everybody to actually take a moment after I describe this at the end to walk our front lawn. And you'll see that there's the crisscross path. I love that the crisscross path, the idea was to make it accessible, to bring others across and to bring people in. We're across a busy street, and you're out in the open. And how many people, when they come to Shul on high holidays, walk through our front lawn, and what are you doing? You're probably talking to somebody. You might even be on your phone for the last minute before you get into Shul, and you have to put that away. And you come from a noisy, there's no ceiling on the space, wide open, tumultuous world. And then you get to the stairs. Well, to go upstairs, there are no railings on those stairs. You actually have to, bring myself present. I have to be aware that I'm stepping up. So you're beginning to leave the world at large, and you're beginning to come a little more present to where you are. And those steps take you up. They lift you up from the earth and onto a terrace. And that terrace has a tree, which you can associate with the tree of life. It's connecting heaven and earth. As you're coming up from nature, it's still bringing nature there. And you come through those front doors, and you can only come through those front doors as an individual. It's really hard to walk through those doors two at a time. You have to walk through yourself as an individual to come into the sanctuary. You have to make that choice to come into the shul. And when you come in, you are compressed. And this is something Frank Lloyd Wright uses. This is something that other architects in those great Gothic churches use. You come from outside, and the first thing is you get compressed. You get a sense of yourself in space. And the next space you walk into is the foyer. Now, the foyer isn't really any much taller, and that's on purpose, but it is a place where you can begin to, I feel like it's you're joining a tributary water that comes in, and you're joining others, so you've come into a sense of group. And from there, you walk into the sanctuary. And as you walk into the sanctuary, the ceiling lifts up, and your eyes lift up, and it gives you a heavenward bound. And as you come in, what I love is that the light falls on your shoulder from the choir loft. The light is from behind you, and it's shining you as you come forward, and it shines toward the bima. And all of those are things that create this atmosphere. Now, for me, I apologize to anyone in the room. I partly chose this show when I moved here because of the sanctuary. And I found that the Oak Park Temple was too busy for me, that what I really liked was the simplicity. And I've always seen the beams on the top remind me of an ark, as in Noah's Ark, and that we have this volume of space. And the materials that they use, that you talked about being difficult, we have bricks of the earth. Bricks are earth that have been baked and put through stress, and they survive, and they're on our walls, they're man-made. And then we have wood, from nature, and something that is essential to all life. We really celebrate in this show. So all of that, and then you push this wall back, and we see the windows. Now, the thing I love about the windows is the fact that when it's dark, our story shines forth when it's dark outside. Our story shines to everyone on the outside. And when it's light, they nurture us. Our story nurtures us. So I think that is something that is, there's a poetry to buildings. And that's what I see when I see our shul, is I see the poetry. And I also see the fact that everybody who's ever walked in this shul is still here. That buildings live, and they have the marks on the floor of the kid who was here and, ran into the radiator and made a dent in it. And the bathroom has the tile that was broken because somebody dropped something, on the floor. And so it is a living piece that celebrates all of us. And I think that's, I don't know, I think I got off topic.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you. It's beautiful. And just from a parent's perspective, I'm a former preschool parent, now a religious school parent, and I mean, this space that we're in right now is really, for my kids, this is where, maybe this wasn't true in your day, but was the preschool still running around in Gottlieb Hall on rainy days? Is this where they spent most of their playtime? Well,
It depends upon who,
I'll tell you, in the era of Claudine Goralnik, it's definitely the place where the kids run all the time. So, to your point, this space is where my son and my daughter remember like their playtime. This is like their hangouts, and so for them it has a very visceral and very strong association. And I'm sure that's different from different people. In different eras, I'm sure people remember when there were staged plays that were in this place here.
Right.
Tribute to them. And of course, conversations like this one.
but John Thorpe really, he loved places, and he loved, and I think that he heard that history, and he respected that. And even the huge panels, the doors that open here, and the scale of the space is just so beautiful, and he wanted to continue that. And I think that that's what he wanted to do in the classrooms, and even though the second floor, our classroom numbers go up and go down, how do we make space that people want to be in, where there is that joy in the halls and that is flexible enough to answer what needs to be answered at any given time?
To be more practical, this was, in its day, one of, I think, the largest capital campaigns the synagogue had undertaken. I talked to Rabbi Merelman, and I believe he told me this was approximately a $2 million fundraising effort that took place over the course of a couple of years. Actually, we can scroll through some of these, past the damaged buildings. Sorry, there's the basement again. There was a program in 1994, maybe some of you attended, Living for Today, Building for Tomorrow. This was the Kadima program, and these are the people who were involved. Shirley Lieb, who unfortunately is, I think, gone this weekend, otherwise she would try to have been here. I spoke to David earlier this week, and Paul Wolfman were, I think, and also Robert Goldstein were, I believe, co-chairs of the committee at the time.
And he might have been Lador Vador. Don't hold me to who was where when.
Some of these are hard to find. I go to the basement and I find these, and they don't always have good labeling. So, but if you scroll further, I think you have the program that this was, I think, Kadima fundraising program that was done in, I think, 1994. And you see kind of the designs of the plan. You are there in the picture.
Yeah, that's me.
Rabbi Merelman is here as well in these pictures. And so you kind of see how this took place. Do you recall any challenges in terms of working up to get the fundraising that necessary and then to ultimately implement the actual construction associated with all that? Were there delays associated with that? Was there any kind of program plans that...
I don't know anybody who has had construction. Has anybody here ever had construction that there's not delay in? I mean, there's always a delay. That's sort of par for the course. I believe it took us quite a while, but when we started to get funds, we sort of hit a point and then it started to roll a bit more. And a lot of that was done with this and coffees, speaking to people and really having them understand what difference and how much more flexible and how much more they can use the space and what ideas can happen. And there were a lot of things, as you saw, with the building falling down, replacing windows and making it more functional. I actually, did the heating and air conditioning system ever fail? Yes? Outside, the giant behemoth of the air conditioning, it was not? Okay, well, but is it new? Is it new?
It's
Okay.
new, yeah. This was our most recent big thing.
Okay, so that was one of the things that we did not do. It was way past its life, and then we decided we were not going to put that in the campaign, and we would wait until it failed, because we figured once it failed, it'd be pretty easy to raise money for that, And it seemed to have a life that continued on. So that was, we did decide what would be in and what would be out. Yeah.
I think either the actual plans that were ultimately approved by Mr. well, by the synagogue that were put up by Mr. Thorpe. And so you can see kind of, this is the structure we basically have today. So I found these recently in the preschool, or rather they were found for me and given to me, and they're really quite nice. More slides. And then this is the construction of the space, which I think this was 1996. I won't even hold me to it. Okay, so there are great Polaroids, and so you can kind of recognize the spaces as we have them. That's, of course, the small sanctuary chapel on the top and in the bottom right, and there's the entranceway being redone. Was the building, during this construction, could people use the building? Okay, so make do. Okay. Can you want more? Yeah, and here's sort of a real sense of the complete kind of gutting that had to be done for some of these spaces.
You know, I think one of the difference from this versus when you were talking about Rabbi Babin, having done a lot of construction and worked for major construction, I worked for First National Bank for a while, Murphy-Yon, having seen the fact that one of the things that drives costs up and also elongates the process is when you don't make decisions and stick to them. It's when you make lots of changes as you go through. So I was pushing fairly hard for that, to make our decisions and not make a lot of last-minute changes, and I do think that that helped. Actually, I think one of the last things that came in was the furniture for the administrator's office. That was one of the last things, but it's still there. That's good. That's good. Yeah, the lighting system, you know, the whole idea of the lights that are in that corridor, the idea was to tie that together and to bring that light in and to make that space more usable and vibrant rather than just having that a dark corridor. And I don't know, do you use still? We put speakers in to make sure that if people came and the children were moving around and people had to be outside the sanctuary, that they could hear the service without having to actually be in the room. No?
The system has troubles.
Oh, that's great. And I'm in Evanston, or I'd be here more often.
Yeah. I think that.
10 years ago, right after Rabbi came, Monica and I put together a committee. We wanted to redo the kitchen, but it was so astronomical in price that we did
Norma.
a new stove, all new vent fans, new freezers, and we wanted to change the floor, but because they discovered there was asbestos under it, it would have been like $250,000, so the floor never got changed. But they're all new cabinet doors, and on the west wall, they added a counter, cabinets, drawers, and everything that gets vitally used by the preschool. And then also, we have changed with your help, the beautiful area to sit in the front foyer when you walk in, with chairs and couches, and we have in the terrace, a brand new terrace. So we've added a lot of things over the years, right?
Are you ready for questions? I think so, yeah.
All right, can I, Len, I'll give you the microphone in just a minute. Okay. Linda, your description of the building as a living thing, and it was just amazing, and I'll never look at it again. And Morris and I spend too much time in the front greeting on Shabbat. And I look out the windows and I look out at Harlem and I watch people traverse across as a shortcut from Thomas to Harlem. And I always say, now we're also concerned about security. My first thought is, who are these people? But that's okay. And the other day, I guess it was the second day of Sukkot, I was in the front, and there was somebody who was sitting on the bench outside the window. I have never, in all of my years, seen anybody sit on that bench. And I said to myself, should I go out there? Should I see who he is and what he's doing there? And I said, no, I'll just let him sit. And eventually he got up and continued his journey. But, you just opened up the building in a new way for me. So thank you.
I'm glad. I think all of where our world is today, it's been in terrible places before. And I think that this is our home, and this is our way to live and be in the community and to shine forth. I mean, I've been sitting here looking at this door, and it has a reflection of the stained glass windows that you can see on that. And it's an important place to have us all live together as a community. I agree.
So there are a lot of things that came to me as I listened to your presentation. The first one, I remember the various meetings where you brought different architects in who talked about their ideas. And you learned then that all of them had there's a palette that they used for religious and a language that they used for religious art. And there was such similarity whether they were Jewish architects or not. And we were having trouble deciding. And then at the last minute, somebody brought Thorpe to Goldstein's attention. And then we just went with him. I mean, it was not that easy to switch, but it was great. Another random thought, when you were talking, Michael, about the kids playing in here, the decision to go with this floor was a difficult one. It was a very expensive composite floor and very subject to scratching. And we just had the kids' playground out there with sand, so the kids weren't allowed to come in from the back because we didn't want sand in here. It was very careful not to mark up this floor. A couple of years have gone by. There's a little wear. I've been a little worn since then too. But so that, but it was just, we were so worried about this floor. So many changes. What's now mostly the nursery, when we joined in '53, just after the building was finished, was called the youth room. And it went around, and on the holidays, if you were late for Kol you had to go in the youth room. You couldn't come in the sanctuary. And on the high holidays it was overflowed, so they had a speaker in the ceilings of the youth room, which is now, and you would have services there. So there were a lot of changes. Moving the rabbi's office upstairs, and then I don't know if you mentioned it because I stepped in a minute late, but I think the space for the women's bathroom drove a lot of what happened on that floor too, because it had to be made ADA compliant, and that pushed spaces around. And the elevator, the big controversy, if the elevator is going to go up, I said it has to go down as well. You're not going to just have it go one way because you want to do it later again. It's going to be another $100,000 or $200,000. So all those kind of things had to be brought in. You did drive us to keep to the plan, sometimes frustratingly, but yeah, you did, and it was very important to get it done.
One of the things we'd never addressed was the fact that they wanted to have a handicap lift up to the bima. And it was, yes, we did deal with that, you're right. And it was very challenging to make something that would actually work. And the only way to do that was really to have something that would temporarily come in and lift somebody up. And again, there was a cost that was associated with it. And I love that, now there are lecterns so that we can have that on the floor. And there's always more than one solution. And sometimes it's changing how we operate or we see things.
So sadly, that tree that you mentioned is no longer there. I used to love to look out at it if I was on the bima for any reason. The tree from the front lawn is gone, from the plaza. And that made possible, among other things, the gorgeous new plaza that's just been completed, thanks to the Solomons. The loss of the tree that was on the front,
We're not going to put a new tree?
where the plaza was hard to see it go, but it was dying.
No new tree?
No tree. It's gone, sadly, but the plaza is gorgeous now, and much.
I did
anyway.
notice the sukkah, and
Yeah.
I just figured the tree was in the middle because I drove by quickly.
And just the other thing, I don't think that bench, how long has that been there? It's not been there that long.
As I said, it's a living space. It changes, and we have to change with it, yes.
Well, that tree, as beautiful as it was, died, and that was what happened. And so when we redid as I was watching it from the beamer every week, and over a few years, there were less and less leaves, and soon here, there was nothing left on it. It was completely dead. So when we redid the patio, but then we planted a whole bunch of new trees on the side and other places around the area. So new trees went in, but not in that specific place. But now we have a sukkah, which is like a temporary tree right there.
There you go.
And we love doing stuff on having the sukkah there too. So And we have fruit, we have plums, and the other trees are planted, and so it's all alive.
You want to ask if there are questions? Do you have more pictures? Yeah?
I also want to thank you for your lovely description of how you experienced the building. I actually moved here right after the work was done, so I never saw the previous, but I've now been here ever since. And in this conversation, I was just thinking about the biggest changes that have really happened outside in terms of, I hope you'll take a look if you didn't get a chance, the playground and its placement and everything, and the secret what are they called, bollards that you can't see anymore because the trees have grown around. Our hidden garden that, when we first put it in, there was concern that it wouldn't be aesthetically appropriate, and then a couple days ago, Phyllis said to me, 2 people didn't even know where we were growing this food that we've been donating. And then, of course, our native landscape as well, but we also have more trees, we have fruit trees and everything. So I think that it's interesting to listen to how the physical environment has changed within the building to adapt to changes, and we've also adapted outside. And I'll be curious to see how things change in the future to adapt to our changing congregation.
It was mentioned to me when I got here, and I vaguely remember it, that when we put the children's play area out front, because it was not out front beforehand, that there was the, how everybody has to have a green lawn, and that green lawn is sort of a sacred thing in the suburban community. So there was a lot of hesitation when we put that there. And there was the talk about putting trees around it so that it would shield it. And somebody else was not happy with trees because they were afraid somebody could hide in the trees. So, all of this conversation, the basketball court still hasn't existed yet, but the trees finally got up there. And, it's that living, breathing, adjusting to what's happening in society, what's happening inside, and making the changes. And to me, that's what makes this such a successful building, is that think about all of the different things this has been and how it does change, and it has continued to change. And there was talk at one point, I think at Kadima, about adding a 3rd floor, and making the whole thing taller so that we could have more classrooms, there was one donor who was really hard pressing that one. And, the cost and the expense to do that, you're never going to have enough space, as much space as you have. You always use whatever your space you've got and you fill it up. So that was one of the conversations too. Can we and should we do that? And that is an answer to another one of your questions that you had asked about how things changed. And he's checking his watch, so any other questions? Yes.
I think that's it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Linda, for coming out and talking to us. I think that's all we have for today. Rabbi, do you have something you want to say?
Well, I just want to thank both of you for, I remember maybe 8-9 years ago talking to Linda, and you had the same beautiful poetic vision of the building, and just hearing it in its full bloom today, the poetry of it was beautiful, and it's transformative in how we see the space. Thank you for coming back, and thank you, Michael, for your trove of research and for bringing that, and we're all wondering how we can preserve it and let it tell the story of our congregation for generations to come, and wondering how you find the time to do all that incredible research. And really, we're so fortunate to have you done that, and for us to have access to that. And as everybody's talking, the book of Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. And as you've been bringing away your research, we keep finding the same initiatives and ideas and concerns and worries. But what I get from all of it, and from both of your talks, is also trying to connect the eternal themes beyond all of it and how it affects us as people and as Jewish people. And that's ongoing, and we're still trying to do. And maybe just as we close off, tomorrow the hostages may return home. It looks likely. Then God willing, we're moving toward the end of the war, a ceasefire, and hopefully more than that, peace. So we hope that that's really going to happen. And thank you both again, and thank you everyone for coming. Chag Sameach.